Hey all, Avros here, back with the next Lufenia fight from Desch's Lost Chapter. This fight is up against the Flumen Draco boss. The annoying watery birds are back again to bother Desch and your party. The bosses will start this fight with the orb up, and it will have a 15 count, which will be increased via AoE HP damage, which will add 2 to the count on each orb. The orbs themselves will disappear when the bosses hit 49% HP individually, so each one will lose its own orb itself, and they won't both lose them when one of them hits 49% HP, so keep that in mind, and won't come back for the remainder of the fight at that point. Other things to keep in mind with this boss, it's weak to thunder damage and absorbs water. They also will enter Magia State, or Magia State, I'm not entirely sure how to pronounce that one, which will increase their bravery as well as giving them a low turn rate. You'll notice this on the very first turn of the quest. They'll activate it and delay themselves so that your party actually gets a turn before them, despite the fact that it looks like they have 2 turns each sort of back to back right at the very start of the quest. Entering Magia State will also purge all debuffs from the bosses. They'll actually cleanse themselves, so just something to keep in mind if you're letting them have turns. They will change between Magia State and Physio State, I think is the other one, and that will remove their debuffs there, so keep that one in mind. They also become very tanky below 50% HP. They will go into, from my experience, Magia State Plus at that point and lose the orb. This also will make all of their single target attacks go from single target to single target Brave plus a split damage AoE HP attack. And the AoE attacks that they do in this state also deal double HP damage, so you really want to avoid them taking any turns when they get to that point. That basically covers off everything you need to know about these bosses, so to that end, talking about, AoE HP damage, them doing double damage, wanting to avoid them taking turns, we'll talk about the party that I brought to this fight. So I brought a party of Lightning, Terra, and Yang. So Yang is really the star here of this Lufenia fight in this Lost Chapter. His LD gave him a massive increase in power, and he brings along a new unique sort of playstyle to how you can play Dissidia in what he actually does. So his LD buff gives him a follow-up attack on any of your party members' attacks that does AoE HP damage, and actually hits everything else in the fight, so it's very useful for that to be something that you can have in your fight. And if you've got very fast consecutive turns, turn-stealing units, ones that generate additional turns like Terra and Lightning do out of their LDs, he will get a lot of attacks off and follow up on everything they do, and this follow-up does also work during burst phases after every turn of the burst phase. So as long as he has that 2-turn LD buff up, you will continue to get those follow-up attacks, so very, very useful thing to keep in mind. During this fight, I did have the bug that is in the in-game notice right now, where Yang's follow-up attack was triggering off additional attacks that it shouldn't have been, so not your own party's attacks. I did actually get a couple of follow-ups, as you'll see in this fight, from the enemy attacking stuff, and then Yang following up that attack with his LD attack. So if you do use this team comp in a fight yourself, just be aware of that I did get a few additional attacks from that as well, so just something to keep in mind. So using Yang in this fight and that LD buff and his follow-up attacks, seeing as they are AoE HP attacks, this will allow you to keep the orb up, which does allow you to bring someone like Lightning to this fight, as she is very single target focused and doesn't do AoE HP damage at all. But after each one of her attacks, if she's getting that Yang follow-up, that will keep the orb count up, and you can control the orb just almost entirely with Yang. So getting as much free damage out of this using Lightning and Terra was a huge part of the strategy I had going into this fight. It's also why my summon is set to Ifrit, as I'm trying to maximize Yang's attack stat as much as possible, so every time he's doing those follow-up attacks, I'm getting as much damage out of that as I possibly can. The other thing I did to try and maximize this, as well as trying to get through the boss fight in a quick amount of turns and very effectively, was bringing along a Garland friend. So early on in the fight, I'm using Lightning to control a lot of turns, get a lot of extra damage out of Yang, and then once we get to about 60% HP, I'm replacing Lightning with Garland, using his burst effect, and then switching to using Terra to abuse a lot of her turns, using her burst as well during the time when Garland is up, just to maximize how many turns she's getting. And you'll also notice if you watch, when I use Terra's burst phase, I'm waiting till the very end of the actual burst combo, using all those 6 turns, to use her LD buff, using that Chaos Wave, so that she comes out of the burst effect with 4 consecutive turns as well, to maximize just how many consecutive turns I'm getting out of Terra there before that sort of LD runs out of uses. So having covered what the team's intended purpose was and how we're actually trying to deal damage with it, it's sort of worth talking about the core units I brought as well to this fight. So the 2 major ones in this are Gabranth and Jack. Gabranth is being used very early on, basically from the start of the fight, to get his debuffs up, increase bravery damage and everything there, so that Yang can get as much out of his follow-up as possible. And I'm talking about Yang a lot, but he's really instrumental with the strategy I'm using with this team. So getting his bravery damage up with that was very, very useful to make sure he's hitting hard and hitting hard throughout the entire fight. The other thing, Jack's call is for after the 50% when the bosses cleanse themselves with debuffs to get another debuff up, increase bravery damage, use consecutive turns again, get as much out of Yang as possible until the sort of fight is over, or until, you know, the bosses need to take any sort of turns. I don't think you could get through this fight without sort of preventing them taking turns as much as I did, and I don't think they took any turns at all towards this end part of the fight when I was doing this, so just something to try and aim for there, because if they get those turns with the double damage, it could just be over after a single attack and you have to reset, which I did have to do in a few attempts that I tried. The last call I brought, and it's worth sort of highlighting this one, I tried to be a bit too clever. I brought Kam'Lanaut as a call for Yang, as his LD call does allow for the user of his call to get bravery refunded based on the HP damage they deal. So with Yang going in and doing his HP damage, he's doing that, getting some bravery refunded, going in again attacking, getting more damage in, getting some bravery refunded, rinse and repeat on all those follow-up attacks. That said, when you get to the 50% part of this fight and the bosses become more tanky, that amount you're getting refunded and the amount that he's doing really starts to drop off, so a better choice for Yang would probably be to bring Kryl and use her lightning enchantment out of her LD. Don't necessarily need it up right at the very beginning of the fight, but because it is a lightning enchant and the bosses are always weak to thunder throughout the whole entire fight, you could bring it very much there, use it at the start, get as many turns out of Yang like I'm saying, and it won't wear off. The bosses will always be weak to the thunder damage, and you'll maximize your damage that way instead of bringing Kam'Lanaut. I think Kryl probably would have been a bit easier, made this fight a bit less stressful in the final phases, but just something to keep in mind there. Kam'Lanaut, if you don't have Kryl's LD, would still work, just not as effectively as I think Kryl would, and I haven't had a chance to test it yet, but I would assume Kryl is more useful. All in all, this fight kinda sucked, to be honest. It's a bit of a stressful one. Working through this fight and trying to get the turn order correct, make sure that you're not giving the bosses too many turns, trying to get as much delay and turn stealing out of Lightning and Terra there wasn't a particularly fun experience for this one, so take this as like a valid strategy to try and copy so that you can try and limit the amount of stress that this fight gives you and limit the amount of annoyance that it does provide, as I'm sure there's a few other people out there that have also done similar runs with this team as well. Not that I've done a whole bunch of research into what people have been doing, but this is just another option that you've got to try and make this fight work. That all being said, if you have any questions or comments, please leave them below. Thank you for watching, and enjoy the rest of the video.
っちゃうぞ。届くんだな。いったおいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、降り注いで。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、降り注いで。
おいど
これなら。
おいど
魔導の刃よ。
おいど
お願い、力を貸して。
おいど
終わりにする。みんなを守る力を。行くよ、究極の光よ。さよなら。
おいど
魔導よ、降り注いで。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
お願い、力を貸して。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど連続でいく。おいど
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど行くぞ。 力でいく。遅い。おいど。楽しませてみせろ。まだ終わらんぞ。おいど。
魔導よ、この効果で。
おいど。楽しませてみせろ。まだ終わらんぞ。おいど。すぐおのおいど。
魔導よ、降り注いで。
おいど。
魔導の刃よ。
おいど。
感謝する。行くか。
おいど。
行くか。
おいど。
蹴散らす。
おいど。おいど。
てあ魔導よ、この効果で。